Yo, 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 what is good, everybody? Welcome into the Free Money Podcast here, coming to you live with the ACC 2021 edition. Here on the show, I'm going to do a brief recap of all the teams, give you guys a little numbers and odds as well, and what I like going here into the year for 2021. So, we're going to start off a little random, but Georgia Tech 2021 preview. Last season, they were 3-7, beating Duke, Louisville, and Florida State. Jeff Sims, the dual threat quarterback for Georgia Tech, was thrust into the starting role last year and threw for 13 touchdowns and 1,881 yards to go along with the troubling 13 interceptions. But I just attribute that to a pandemic, being a freshman, and kind of the weird, wacky schedule, them only playing 10 games last year. And I think he will improve on that because he was a four-star quarterback, and now he gets a full training camp to kind of grow into that offense and get closer with the team, the coaches, and everything that comes with being a college kid. He did also run for 492 yards last year to add on with 6 touchdowns as well. This is probably the first kind of big push that Georgia Tech has made going away from the option. Even though Sims is more of a running quarterback, kind of does have a possible option, it isn't solely focused on that option. And I think the Georgia Tech will be better for that because, I mean, this is 2021. We're no longer playing in the 80s and 90s to where running is the name of the game. Now you pass over the top, get big yards, and go from there, especially in the ACC with a lot of good defenses that can defend the rush well, as you will see later on. As for a bunch of other previews, teams like Virginia Tech, even though there is no option, they can still run the ball well, which is nice. They just need Sims to progress into that passer that they need going forward. They had the 43rd most rushing yards in the NCAA last year, and 4.7 yards per rush, which was 47th best in the country. Their top 3 rushers return, including the quarterback Jeff Sims. Their success rate on runs was 47.5% and a .24 PPA per rush. So PPA is points per added, expected points added when they crunch the numbers and look at things like line yards and a bunch of other numbers that I will mention as we go. They have a good offensive line, slightly behind Clemson in line yards, but lack explosiveness, bottom third of the ACC. So line yards is a stat that the offense is attributed when they look at the play of how many yards the offensive line is actually attributed with for the running back. But the passing has to improve. Only 199.1 passing yards per game. The completion percentage is not pretty either. 53% for Jeff Sims last season, and there was only one receiver above 350 yards. Then on the defensive side, Curry, the leading tackler and tackle for loss guy, is gone on the team. And some turnovers on the defense are leaving and will need to be replaced. So they have to figure that out as well going forward this year because they had a great recruiting class in 2020. And I think that 2021 is the year that materializes and come forward after a rough season last year. I do like Jeff Collins. I just don't know if they'll make it that much of an improvement. I think they can probably go about 2 or 3 wins up from that. And as I mentioned, this is just a huge year because Jeff Collins has to see these recruits come to fruition. And this is the year 2021, a full training camp. Jeff Collins gets his guys in, and the team moves forward with Jeff Sims progressing in that second season. So to recap their schedule, I think that they end up going 7-5 with 2 quick wins in non-conference against Northern Illinois and Kennesaw State. They then face a rough 2-week stretch at Clemson and versus UNC. They then go on a 4-game win streak. They beat Pitt Panthers. They beat Duke. I think that they beat the Virginia Cavaliers as well and Virginia Tech. They then play the Hurricanes in Miami, lose that one. They play Boston College at home. I think they win that one, then finish off the year with 2 losses to Notre Dame and Georgia to finish the year 7-5. But I can see them going 6-6. I can see them losing that Boston College game possibly towards the end of the year. But the play here on the Barstool Sportsbook, over 5 minus 110. There's no way this team does not at least win 5 games. If they win 5 games, you get a push. And I think they end up going 7-5 and surprising a lot of people. I think that this team can rely on the run. They get Jeff Sims to improve slightly because the offensive line is there to protect him. Give him a little bit more time. They can win 6 games at the minimum, 7 at the most. Love the over 5 at minus 110. Great year after a tremendous season that I don't think many people expected last season, going 8-4, losing to Virginia Tech, North Carolina, Miami, and losing to Kentucky in the bowl game late in the season. Devin Leary should be the starter after Bailey Hockman leaves the program last season with 890 yards, 8 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. But I think that there will be a QB battle, and this is one to watch for many NC State fans and anyone that really follows college football. Ben Finley, shout out Arizona, arrives, the brother of NFL QB and NC State standout Ryan Finley. I think he could start because I'm just not sure if Devin Leary is the guy to go the whole year. I think that if they kind of struggle early on, that Ben Finley might be the name to watch out for and could take over that starting spot. The wide receiver room is pretty experienced. Easy last season, 738 yards, 5 touchdowns. Thomas, 529 touchdowns, or 529 yards and 6 touchdowns, Carter, 477 yards and 2 touchdowns. So that is 13 touchdowns right there that return right away. And the tight end position was non-existent last year. So redshirt freshmen will provide something that they lacked last season. And the NC State Wolfpack were on the bottom half of the ACC with 42% success rate on passing plays and a .30 PPA. But the scoring opportunities was high, 2.6. So that's always great. Scoring opportunities, just factor in plays where the wide receiver was open when making the catch. So that is a great number to have, 2.6, top third of the ACC, which is great because you're going up against schools like Miami, UNC, Notre Dame, Clemson, those guys. So always great to stand out in that. And NC State had their best conference record since 1932. They went 700 win percentage last season. So that is a beautiful thing to see there. Hopefully they can have that again this season. And they have a decent non-conference schedule and have a favorable away schedule this season. But some key numbers that the Wolfpack need to improve on or maintain this season. Defensive third down conversion rate was 31st in the country, 36.61. That is great. That's something they can build on and a reason why they were 8-4 last year. And the defensive points per game, 29.2, which was 61st best in the country. So not bad as well. Anytime you can keep a team under 30 points, especially in the game that is college football today, that is beautiful to see. The rush defensive yards per game allowed 173.3, not the greatest, which is about 72nd best in the country. So that needs to improve if the Wolfpack want to do better than the 8 wins that they had last year. Great news for the defense is almost all the front 7 is staying. Besides McNeil, he went to the draft. 61 tackles for loss returns and 21 sacks. The defense is for sure a strength. 18% of plays resulted in an interception, tackle for loss, pass breakup, or forced fumble last season. So a little under 1 out of every 5 plays. which is what the Wolfpack thrived on last season. Their stuff rate was incredible. 24% of plays were no gain or a tackle for loss, which was 18th best in the NCAA last year. This D-line is no joke and something that the Wolfpack can fall back on. 62.5% of plays that were 3rd and 2 or less or on 4th down were stopped and best in the ACC, which is great, especially when two teams made the college football playoff last year, Notre Dame and Clemson. So to recap their schedule, they start off with South Florida. That is a win. They travel to Mississippi State. I think they lose that one. They play Furman, which is a win. Play Clemson, which is a loss. Rattle off 2 wins in a row against Louisiana Tech and Boston College. Travel to Miami, and they lose that one. They then play Louisville, which is a win. They then have their last loss of the season at Florida State, which is a loss. Then rattle off 3 wins to finish the year. Wake Forest, Syracuse, and UNC. So I project them to go 8-4 this year and love the over 6.5 wins at plus 110. That is at MGM because Barstool Sportsbook did not have those odds listed. So that is great value on a team that I project to go 1.5 wins over the total. Let's say they lose another game. Let's say they lose to a decent team like Wake Forest. 7 wins right there. And even if they beat Mississippi State, which I didn't have them doing, I think that the over 6.5 is great, especially if quarterback play can improve, which was their weak point last year, because the defense is going to be there. They just need to have better quarterback play to maintain that 8 wins that they had last season. All right, now we'll go to a bit of a stinker and a team that I think will be the worst in the ACC. The Syracuse Orange last season went 1-10, and I think that's going to be more of the same here, possibly even worse because there is an additional game that they played than last year. QB battle between DeVito and transfer Garrett Schrader, former 4-star from Mississippi State, will determine how many wins the Syracuse Orange have. Taj Harris, one of the only bright spots for the Cuse offense, 733 yards and 5 receiving touchdowns last year returns. They also transfer in Abdul Adams, former 4-star from Oklahoma, transfers in and looks to compete for the starting running back job because it was abysmal last year. They had the worst success rate, 32%, and bottom quarter of the ACC in line yards. Almost everything in the ACC on offense, they were the bottom of, which isn't going to win you many football games, especially in a conference with great defense. Their leading tackle for loss returns with 8 tackles for loss, and second with 7.5, and the third most 7. They all return, so that's a good news for the Syracuse defense. And the top 2 sackers return as well. Cuse is decent at stopping the run, 46% success rate, and total havoc was bottom half of the ACC, 16% of the time a play was tackle for loss, interception, deflected. So that needs to improve. I just don't see that happening this year. Their stuff rate was crazy low, worse than the ACC, so almost no pressure was created from that D line. Stat-wise, pretty bad. Their defense in a lot of categories was almost the worst you could possibly be because I believe there's 228 college football teams in Division I, and they were near it a lot. Last season, rush yards allowed 254.8, which was 192nd. So not great. And then the passing yards, 209.2, which was 102nd. So not bad. The real anomaly they had on defense was their takeaways. They averaged 2.2 per game, which is 11th best in college football, but their offense was scary bad, and I would look for that to continue. 17.8 points per game, 117th best in the NCAA, 265 yards per game, 125th, and their third down conversion rate was 26%, which was 123rd. The rushing yards and pass yards, both above 110 nationally, so that is, I guess, okay. Not great. I don't know what to say much about the Syracuse Orange men. And I'm also a knucklehead. There's 129 football teams in the football bowl subdivision, not 200 and whatever the hell I said. So even more alarming when those things come up like that. Syracuse was bad, and I think that will continue again this year, unfortunately. So their schedule, I can see them getting 2 wins, but I think they end up getting 1. They travel to Ohio for some action in week 1, and they take the loss there in my mind. They also play Rutgers, another loss. Thank goodness for Albany, because Albany will be, in my estimation, their only win this season. They then play a Liberty team with a quarterback that is projected to go top 10. Florida State, who is much improved. Wake Forest, much improved as well. They then play Clemson, Virginia Tech, Boston College, Louisville, NC State, and Pitt, which is why I think the under 3 wins at plus 105 is the play here. You get great value on a team. I just don't see how they win 3 games. I guess if you give them Ohio, because I think Rutgers is finally coming into their own in the Big Ten here. In Ohio, I can see maybe beating, but that's a team that goes to bowl games and wins about 8 to 9 games a year. And Syracuse won only 1 game last year. So I don't see much happening from the Syracuse Orange men. That team is rough. So give me the under 3 wins at plus 105. We will go back to back now with garbage cans of teams. The Duke Blue Devils last season went 1-9 in conference and 2-9 on the year, beating Syracuse and the Charlotte 49ers. Chase Bryce had a bad year after transferring in from Clemson. He was supposed to be the savior for this team and didn't quite turn out that way. But the projected starter, Gunnar Holmberg, isn't much better. In his lone start last season, 18 for 25, 161 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Duke had the second worst offensive success rate in the ACC, 39% and .10 points added per play. Good news for Duke. Durant returns with 817 yards and 8 touchdowns on the ground, but Dean Jackson went to the NFL and he is no longer there to help support that. The wide receiver room is experienced, though. 4 of 5 wide receivers return to help the offense, but that is about all the offense has positively. The defense is slightly better than the offense. Power success on D is bottom half, but near UNC on the chart, and they did have some success last season. Duke's total havoc ain't bad, 8th best in the ACC, .17. Honestly, this team is kind of sketch. I have no idea how good they're going to be because they out of nowhere they just play well. Like Daniel Jones just came out of nowhere. They were in a bowl game one year against I think like A&M or something. So there's not a team that I can cap for. I've learned this. Have no clue what they're going to do. They play in a stadium with like 10,000 people. So quite strange. I have them going 3-9. I have them beating Charlotte, NC AT&T, and Kansas. I can see them getting another one possibly against Northwestern, but I don't think they win much in the ACC. So that line of over 3.5 at minus 125 is way too sketchy for me. I would stay away, but that is pretty much the preview that I have for them this season going forward. I don't think they're going to be very good. They could either be 1-11 or 3-9, and that's going to be hard to figure out in between. Anyone that feels some type of way, let me know, and I will follow you. A team primed for a bounce back here in 2021. We now go to the Florida State Seminoles down in Tallahassee. Rough first year for head coach Mike Norvell, but it is quite an unfair judgment because of COVID last year. The practices, he himself got it. A lot of players got it. So quite unfair to judge him, I feel, on last season. But they did beat Jacksonville State, North Carolina, and Duke. So the North Carolina win was a big one. Kind of set the tone for last season. Quite an improvement from where they've kind of been against the bad teams. QB play was pretty bad for the Seminoles, and that is an area that they will improve on this year because that problem seems to be solved with Mackenzie Milton, former UCF quarterback who suffered probably the worst football injury I've seen in the last decade with that knee against USF. They can now be a balanced team with Mackenzie Milton if he performs like he did in 2018. 2,663 yards, 25 passing touchdowns, and 6 interceptions to add 9 rushing touchdowns to their total as well. One of the worst football injuries that these guys have seen. I just hope that Mackenzie Milton is able to stay on the field for Florida State because their season depends on him, because the quarterback play last year was awful. So I hope for Florida State that they at least can get him healthy and not have their season taken away from them. But the leading running back for Florida State returns, along with Auburn transfer, nephew of Edgerrin James, DJ Williams, transfers in from Auburn. Norvell knows how to coach offense during his time at ASU and head coach at Memphis, and that will be a strength for this team as rushing was last season. FSU had the highest points added per rush in the ACC with .36 PPA and the fourth best success rate in the ACC with 50% on running plays. Nationally, they did well. They had 5.3 yards per rush, which was 19th best in the country, and 194 rushing yards per game, which was 39th best. The passing was where they struggled, but the wide receiver room has improved with redshirt freshman Brian Robinson, former four-star recruit, and freshman Malik McLean to improve upon a decent wide receiver core from 2020. And the Florida State offensive line is a strong point as well. They had the best power success in the ACC at 82%, which is quite indicative of that rushing stat that I mentioned a little bit ago, where the running plays were success or they gained the first down on plays of third or fourth down with 2 yards or less. The line yards were 3.27. They were responsible for, which is second best in the ACC. But they do have to replace 3 starters on that offensive line. So hopefully that can be replaced here this season for them to continue the great running play as well as protect Mackenzie Milton, because I think that will always be an issue for Mike Norvell and the offensive line coaches. FSU is known for putting players in the league, but last year got torched on the linebackers, and they did put 4 players in the league last season. The rush and pass yards per game allowed were both near about 100. Jermaine Johnson transfers in from Georgia, who played not necessarily a starter, but he did get rotated in a lot on the Georgia defense. He had 4.5 sacks last season and provides a little bit of experience going up against some of those SEC offensive lines. Cair Thomas anchors the defensive line. The transfer from 2 years ago was second in tackles for loss and sacks at South Carolina. Because his def coordinator Fuller loves to blitz and the defensive line gets some guys in, I think they might struggle at first, but I think they find their groove towards the end of the year. They get a rough start. They start off with Notre Dame, which I feel that is a loss. They then play Jacksonville State. They win that one and then lose to Wake Forest on the road. Rattle off 2 wins in a row, beating Louisville and Syracuse. Losing to UNC at UNC because I just don't feel UNC loses that game 2 years in a row. They then win one and lose one to UMass and Clemson. Again, I think they beat NC State. I think they have the talent to beat NC State this year. They then lose to bitter rivals Miami and finish off the year with a win at Boston College and at Florida. Now, some of these games can go either way. I'm not quite confident on saying that those are wins. The game against NC State and the game against Florida, I just think that they're better than both of them, but that is what makes them go from 7-5 to 5-7. So I would lean over 5.5 at -125, but wouldn't give out an official play on this. because those games can go either way, really, with the Florida game especially being on the road. Now to the furthest team up north, the Boston College Golden Eagles. Last season went 6-5 in 2020, losing to North Carolina, Virginia Tech, Clemson, Notre Dame, and Virginia. But Phil Jurkovec does return to quarterback and a possible first-round pick, maybe an early second. So that is the strength of their offense, the passing game, for good reason. Last season, 2,558 yards in the air, 17 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. That is great for them to keep that interception rate down because their defense kind of struggles at times. BC was in a lot of games last year late and should win some of those close games that they lost last year. The Golden Eagles' leading rusher is gone, but Levy, with 321 yards, returns and needs to replace 7 touchdowns that leave. But one NFL-bound tight end leaves and another possible one joins BC. FCS All-American Trey Berry replaces 695 yards and 5 touchdowns from Hunter Long. And in 5 games before injury last season, Trey Berry had 25 catches for 340 yards and a touchdown. So hopefully he can be implemented and figure out the system and help out Jurkovec. Boston College will be pass heavy, 44.8 success rate and 0.35 PPA on passing plays. They pass 46% of the time, which is 124th most in the country. They like to use the clock and slow it down. And they pass for 284.2 yards per game, which is 23rd best in the country. So when you're playing BC, you know what you're getting into. They do need a major improvement on defense if they want to improve upon a 6-5 year. Their top 3 tackle for loss guys on the squad leave, and a total of 20.5 tackles for loss leaves and 10.5 sacks. 2 new transfers on the defensive line look to replace that, but it's lacking already some havoc on that defensive line. 10% havoc rate from the front 7 and an 18% stuff rate. The DBs were solid, which is the building block in case the defensive line doesn't figure it out. 6% of plays were interceptions, tackled for loss, or forced fumbles last season. And they had a 5-5 record in the ACC. So I think they start the season off with 3 wins versus Colgate, at UMass, and at Temple. They then rattle off 3 more losses at Mizzou, Clemson, and a loss versus NC State. 2 wins in a row, Louisville and Syracuse. They then play Virginia Tech, at Georgia Tech, Florida State, and versus Wake Forest. Those are all losses in my mind for them to finish the year 5-7. So they can pass, no doubt about it. Well, there's no running game to back that up. 7 touchdowns leave. That's a lot of tackles for loss that leave as well. You're going to have to replace 20.5 tackles for loss, and they already didn't have great front 7 havoc. So a lot of those guys were linebackers that left. So I just don't see them recouping that or recouping those stats from last season. So I'm rolling with the under 7 plus 110 for Boston College Golden Eagles this season. Now on to Miami. Shout out Will Smith. The Miami Hurricanes finished the season last year 8-3 and would have been 12, but the Georgia Tech game got canceled late in the year. Derrick King, their best player, returns, and with that coveted national intent letter or NIL, whatever it stands for, that dude's making bank. But he's smart because he gave a lot of it to his offensive line. The people responsible for protecting you this year, he gave it to them, and I give that +1 win in my handicapping. And the Nationals are going to lose this game. That is unfortunate. But they start the season off against Alabama. I think that is a loss. They then rattle off 4 wins in a row against Appalachian State, take on Michigan State at home, CCSU, Central Connecticut State, and Virginia. They then play UNC, which It's at UNC, and that's going to be a close one, no doubt about it. I gave them a loss, and I think that that is their last loss of the season. They then take on NC State, Pitt, Georgia Tech, 3 wins in a row. I think a battle at Florida State. I think they win that one and finish off the year against Virginia Tech and Duke. So I think that they will go 10-2 on the year. But Derrick King last season had 2,686 yards, 23 touchdowns passing to go with 538 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns running the ball. Hurricanes last season had a 43% success rate and 0.35 PPA on passing plays. Mike Harley returns in the wide receiver room, bringing back 799 yards, a yard shy of 800, 7 touchdowns, and 57 catches. Charleston Rambo, an Oklahoma Sooner transfer, comes in after a solid 2019 and a rough 2020 season. But in 2019, he had 5 touchdowns, 42 catches, and 734 yards. And Knighton will possibly assume the starting role. There is a little bit of a running back battle there. 209 yards last season and 1 touchdown. And Don Chaney, 4-star running back, looks to compete, maybe running back 2, running back 3, but he should provide some pop on offense. They are middle of the pack for ACC with their success rate, 40.9 and 0.13 PPA. And that has to improve on defense if they want to win more. Or no, excuse me, not on defense, on offense, if they want to win more. Derrick King can't do it all. He shouldn't be your leading rusher. He's the quarterback. So hopefully the running backs can improve. Don Chaney should help that out. They were towards the bottom of the ACC with line yards, essentially subtracting points if their offense has a loss on a rush, which was the case because they were at the bottom third of that, pretty much the bottom quarter. So that stat attributes the numbers to the offensive line, and which wasn't great last year, which is crazy because Derrick King did all that with a really bad offensive line. So if they can get any improvement or any young kids coming in to help that out, that should bump them up a little bit. Power rate was great, though. 80% from scoring plays on 3rd and 4th from 2 or less. So anytime it was a close play, Miami converted, which is how you win games. 3rd down conversion is the most important in my mind in football. So that is great to see for our 10-2 Miami Hurricanes. Bubba Bolden transferred in last season to strengthen a decent Miami defense, and he should go off this season with a full training camp with the players and a non-COVID season. Last year, 74 tackles and 6.5 tackles for loss. But 1 interception isn't enough. The defense is returning a lot of starters, and that number needs to go up, and I think it will this season. Losing Jalen Phillips to the NFL is a massive loss. That guy accounted for 15.5 tackles for loss on the defense, and I'm not too sure that can be replaced. So they're going to have to improve in other ways, and I think interceptions may be one of those. Silvera and Harrison Hunter need to step up on that defensive line. Tyrek Stevenson, a DB, going to play cornerback, transfers in and was a 4-star recruit. And Al Blades could fill in on that other side from Tyrek Stevenson. But the defense will improve, and I think that that will propel them to a 10-2 season, possibly 9-3. But the defensive points per game was 49th best in the country. The yards per game, 64th, and red zone scoring, 57th best. All things that I think that they will improve on. And 3 games last season were decided by 5 points or less, which that shows that this team can win those close games that they need to. And they have a favorable schedule to go 10-2 last season, which is why that I like the over 9.5 plus 115 for this Miami Hurricanes team. And I think that they will get it done this season. Now let's get on to the number 4 seed in the college football playoff last year, Notre Dame. Last season, 9-0 conference record, not counting the championship game, but 10-2 overall, making the college football playoff. And they lost their conference championship game to Clemson and their college football playoff game to Bama. Last season, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish had 9 players that ended up going to the league, which is a big number, trailing Bama and Ohio State last season. 3 starters on offense are lost, Ian Book and 2 skill players on offense. 3 starters on defense leave, Owusu Karamoa being the biggest. And according to reports, transfer Jack Cohn is primed to be the starter. And I'm not sure if he should finish the season that way. He did have good numbers at Wisconsin. I just don't know if this Notre Dame team is what he thinks it's going to be, because they do lose a lot of starters. And he was left off the top 30 QB list for the award this season. I mean, I get he has experience, 23 touchdowns, 3,278 yards, but I think there's a reason that he left Wisconsin. He's an efficient quarterback. He can complete the passes that you need, but he lacks that escapability that the QB in the wings that I think ends up starting the season or finishing the season has. Drew Pine, 4-star recruit, is QB number 2, and he should be the starter by the end of the year. Provides that pocket presence to run. Ian Book was great because he was efficient and had that escapability. And I don't think that Jack Cohn has what's necessary to get this team to that same win total last year. Notre Dame had a great balance on offense, passing, 48% success rate when rushing, and 48% success rate when passing. So the rushing PPA, 0.19, and Kyron Williams aims to be the leading rusher this season. He's still there last season, providing 1,125 yards and 13 touchdowns. Ian Book's rushing was 485 yards and 9 touchdowns. I don't think Jack Cohn is anywhere near capable of that. So that's why I think Drew Pine is going to have to come in to hopefully replace that. Whether he's the red zone quarterback or the goal line quarterback, whatever the case may be, they will need to replace those rushing touchdowns. And 9 is no small number. So I think that will help Notre Dame get a little better from what Jack Cohn provides. But Tyree and Flemister had 9 combined touchdowns, but not sure they can replace that in the running back room, especially with 3 starters on offense, and one of them is a freshman. The defensive side keeps a lot, even though they lost Owusu Kamaroa. Hamilton, leading tackler, still there, 63 tackles and 1 interception, but 62 tackles, 11 tackles for loss, and 1.5 sacks leaves with Owusu Karamoa. The defense success rate, 38.3%, so the offenses, when going against them, had a 38.3 success rate. And total havoc, so when they got an interception, fumble, tackle for loss, sack, was 22% of the time. White and Kinnish need to maintain the pressure on the defensive line, and their leading sack player from last year, Ogundeji, and Fiske or someone else needs to fill that in for Notre Dame. So I have them going 8-4, possibly 7-5. I have them losing to start the year, or winning, to Florida State to start the year. That is a win. They beat Toledo. They beat Purdue. I think they lose to Wisconsin out of conference. This Cincinnati game is going to be nuts because of the way that Brian Kelly left it. I think that he's going to try to get the players to play up because he knows that matters to his ego, but the players don't care. These kids do not care about what Brian Kelly did a decade ago. So I think that is a loss because Cincinnati is sneaky a good team. They have good coaching and a lot of good talent. I think they beat Virginia Tech, lose to USC at home. I think they beat North Carolina and beat Navy. I think that upset gets in there somewhere, whether it's from Virginia or Georgia Tech. I have them losing to Virginia on the road. Virginia has given a couple teams some trouble in the years past. They then beat Georgia Tech and lose the final game of the season at Stanford to the Cardinal. So I have them going 7-5, way under that under 9 total. I think a lot of talent leaves this team that isn't going to be able to be replaced, especially from Jack Cohn. I don't think he's the guy to lead this team, and I'm not sure why Brian Kelly thinks he is. So the under 9 wins at minus 132 is the way to go. It is a little bit of a juice bag, but it's going to cash. There's no way this team gets over that 10 win total, goes 10-2. I'll tell you that. And even if they get close to 9, I think Stanford, that rivalry that they've had a little while has been going on. That is going to be a loss for them. So give me the under 9 wins at minus 132. Now going to Chapel Hill and the North Carolina Tar Heels. North Carolina had a great season last year and improvement in 2020, going 8-4, beating Syracuse, Boston College, VTech, NC State, Duke, Wake. So a teams that they should have beat, and a win versus Miami. They lost though to Florida State, Virginia, Notre Dame, and A&M in the Orange Bowl. But let's start with players that are leaving the program. Javonte Williams had a stellar season, 1,140 yards and 19 touchdowns rushing, and provided 3 touchdowns receiving and 305 yards. But perhaps the biggest, Chaz Surratt ends up with my Minnesota Vikings. He had 49 solo tackles and 42 assisted tackles, 7.5 for loss, 6 sacks, and 1 fumble to go along with 1 fumble recovery. Another offensive weapon and possible NFL Offensive Rookie of the Year, De'Ami Brown, wide receiver. He had a yard shy of 1,100 yards, 8 touchdowns, and 55 receptions. Michael Carter, the second part of that rushing duo at North Carolina, is gone as well. He had more yards than Williams rushing, 1,245 with 9 touchdowns to add on 2 reception touchdowns and 267 yards. Lastly, Daz Newsome had 1 rushing touchdown and 6 reception touchdowns, so that scoring will be sorely missed, and the rest of the roster is going to have to step up. They are crazy young, but the offensive production and leading tackler of that team will need to be replaced. The rushing plays for UNC last season had a 53% success rate, the highest in the ACC, and you can see why. They had the highest PPA added with 0.37 on rushing plays. The teams that UNC lost against were good in rush defense and knew that if they stopped that, they had a good chance to beat UNC because Sam Howell is a great quarterback. He is a Heisman favorite. I just think teams are going to get a little wise to how UNC operates because I don't see Mac Brown being the best offensive mind out there. Because against Florida State, they had a 47% success rate and 0.21 PPA. Virginia was the same. Notre Dame, 38% success rate, 0.67 PPA on defense. So these teams they struggle against when they stop the run. But Ty Chandler looks to fill that role, a former top 100 recruit. He has gotten 2,046 yards, 13 touchdowns in his North Carolina career to go with 465 yards receiving and 3 touchdowns. He is transferring in from Tennessee. I'm just not that impressed from a kid that only got really that at Tennessee. That's about 500 a season in 4 years to go along with 3 rushing touchdowns. I'm just not sure that he can fulfill that role, that gaping hole that's going to be in that UNC offense. The passing game will be there. This team averaged the 9th most points per game for a reason in the country. 52% success rate passing and 0.52 PPA. The UNC defense needs to improve. As I mentioned, Chaz Surratt is gone. The experience is there, but the stats are not there. A lot of empty points. They allowed 31.3 points per game, and UNC was in the bottom half of college football with total havoc. 14% of plays resulted in a fumble, INT, tackle for loss, or a sack, and 42% of plays on defense were successful. So kind of towards the middle half, but their schedule is okay, not bad at all. They play Virginia Tech, that is a win. Georgia State is a win. They then follow that up with 3 more wins against Virginia, at Georgia Tech, and at Duke. They lose. See that law, that's going to be tough. That Florida State game, that can go a lot of different ways. I'll give them a win at Florida State because I know I gave it earlier, but I mean, that game, you kind of got to feel how it goes the rest of the year. And I think they do end up losing to Notre Dame because it is at Notre Dame. And they end up with a couple cupcakes at the end with Pitt and Wofford and a loss to NC State. I don't see this team winning 10 games, which is what their win total is set at. The over plus 110 and the under is minus 139. I love the under in this spot, the minus 139. It is a juice bag, no doubt about it. But this team is not winning 10 games, especially when they have tough games against Florida State, Miami, Notre Dame, and NC State. I think they end up going about 9-3 this year, which is well under the 10-win total. And that is on the Barstool Sportsbook, under 10 minus 139. Now, on to the Wake Forest Demon Deacons here in 2021. They went 4-5 last year, pretty much losing to top teams and beating bad ones. Sam Hartman of QB1 fame had a decent season last year, 2,224 yards, and threw for 13 touchdowns and had 5 interceptions. All their key wide receivers are returning and their 14 touchdowns. The top 3 pass offense in the ACC, they had a 43% success rate and 0.47 PPA added on passing plays. 25th most passing yards per game last season, and look for Hartman to take that next step by winning games as opposed to losing them last year. Their number 1 running back from last year, Beal, comes back with his 732 yards. And the number 3 running back brings a measly 115, but he is experienced in the offense. And they do lose 13 rushing touchdowns from last season. But Christian Turner, originally from Michigan, a transfer, looks to help that and that Wake Forest offense. The defense, though, has to improve because Carlos Basham, the leading sacker, is gone. But 4 of their top 5 players that led the team in tackles for loss, they return. The stuff rate and total havoc were good, 22% for the stuff rate and the total havoc, 17.6%. So their schedule is fairly easy, nothing too crazy. They face Old Dominion and Norfolk State to start the year. Those are 2 wins right there. They then take on Florida State at home. I think they win that one to start the year 3-0. Travel to Virginia for a win. I think they beat Louisville. That is another win. So they start the year 5-0. I then think they get a win versus Cuse, but then a trip up at Army, an Army team that runs the ball in an option, a little bit tougher than them. They play Duke. That is a win. And 3 straight losses to UNC, NC State, and Clemson. And they then finish the year up against Boston College. Now, this one's going to be a little tough. Their win total set at over 6.5, minus 134. It's going to be close, but give me the over 6.5, minus 134 on the Barstool Sportsbook. I think this team is capable of winning 7 games. It's going to be tough, but that is the play here. That is the smart play. Sam Hartman's a great quarterback. This team returns a lot of experienced talent and what this team needs if they want to compete in the ACC. Now, going to the Virginia Cavaliers. 5-5 last season. Started the year 1-4, but ended up finishing the year 4-1. Brennan Armstrong was their leading passer and rusher. The offensive success rate was a strength. The top half of the ACC, 44.7% success rate and 0.27 PPA on offense. Their rushing yards per game were 59th best in the country, 168, and the 3rd best explosiveness on runs in the ACC. But it clearly doesn't lead to wins for this team, but it is a good building block if you can get good defense and great QB play. The top receiver, Billy Kemp IV, is returning, providing 644 yards last season, but only 1 touchdown. Henry is an efficient wide receiver, and they're most efficient, 7 receptions, 4 touchdowns. So if they can get him more involved, the offense should be ready to roll. The offense is sneaky efficient, but just lacking that star power and big name that they need to provide double coverages to get other guys open. They have the 48th most yards on offense in the country, 4.5 yards per rush as well. But the defense is where they truly shine. The best defense success rate in the ACC, which is surprising, especially because 2 teams, as I mentioned, made the college football playoff. They bring the pressure as well. 8th best sack percentage in the country at 9.15. But they are losing 4 interceptions and their top 2 sackers with 16.5 sacks total. The turnovers on defense are apparent. 1.9 takeaways per game, 26th best in the country. They do the little things well. 5.1 penalties per game themselves and their opponents at 7.7. But I think the 2 of their best defenders are gone, and I think that they will stay about where they were. I think they end up 5-7, 6-6, and that's too close to call for me. But the over wins for them, over 6, -134, and the under 6 wins at +106 on the Barstool Sportsbook. All right, I will finish out with the final 2 plays that I have and then do a recap. I'm sorry, Pitt and Virginia Tech. I just don't really want to spend any wasted energy on that, unfortunately. So we'll go to Louisville. 4-7 last year. Started the year 1-4. Malik Cunningham was the bright spot last year, but I just think they may be the bottom third of the ACC because their coach, Scott Satterfield, was embroiled in rumors to leave for South Carolina. Ultimately ended up pulling his name out the race and took a huge ad out in the local Louisville paper and apologized. He's moving kind of greasy, to be honest, when his whole thing is family. That's like what he's known for. He's like Dom Toretto, family. You ain't family, pal. You try leaving for greener pastures, and I think the team can see right through that. And if he has a bad year, he will be yanked. So Malik last year passing 2,617 yards in the air, 20 touchdowns and 12 interceptions. Running the ball was great as well. 609 yards and 7 touchdowns. Their top 2 receivers are gone, so a lot of production will be missed. Tutu Atwell and Fitzpatrick are gone, which was 50% of their reception touchdowns from last season. Some targets do return, though, like the tight end Ford, and wide receivers are transferring in. Rushing success was bottom half of the ACC, and that's saying something when you have Malik Cunningham on your team at 42.6%. Their PPA was great, 0.28, but their defense is rough on rush defense. 179.9 rush yards allowed and allow 4.8 yards per rush. Their defense success rate is high for their opponents, 40.3. And pass defense is where they excel, though. 16th best passing yards per game allowed and 6.77 sack percentage. The DBs have the second best total havoc in the ACC. However, their top 2 guys that provide tackles for loss are gone, and more production will be needed from an inexperienced defensive line. I just think Satterfield contemplating leaving and the rough schedule will hurt them this year. I think they have 2 losses out of non-conference. They travel to Ole Miss week 1. That will be a loss. They then play Eastern Kentucky, which will be a win. They then, I think, have 6 straight losses. They play UCF, Florida State, Wake Forest, Virginia, Boston College, NC State, and Clemson. Then rattle off 2 wins against Syracuse and Duke, and then another loss against their bitter rival, the Kentucky Wildcats. So give me the under 6.5 wins minus 139 at William Hill because it was not listed on the Barstool Sportsbook at the time of recording. So we will end with the big dogs here. Clemson Tigers. Cultural playoff standouts, and they pretty much show up every year. They lose Trevor Lawrence, the number 1 overall draft pick, and other members of the offense left for the NFL. That list includes Amari Rodgers, Travis Etienne, Cornell Powell, and offensive lineman Jackson Carman. Now, the big question on the offensive side of the ball is if the quarterback is at the quarterback position, I should say, because they have more than enough recruits to fill in those skill positions. And DJ Ugalele had a great game filling in for Lawrence versus Notre Dame. 29 for 44, 439 yards, 2 passing and 1 rushing touchdowns, but ultimately losing to Notre Dame in the double overtime. Then the next week proceeded to dog Boston College. So a decent sample size and a good game against Notre Dame. The Tigers had a 39% success rate on passing plays, which is a key building block for this program and a staple of their offense, putting now QBs and wide receivers both in the league. They also had a .54 PPA on passing plays this season. Running the ball isn't their strong suit when you do a deep dive on the stats. That's a massive reason that they faltered versus Ohio State, who allowed the 5th least rushing yards in the country. Running the ball well is how they win championships like they did in 2018 and 2019. Lynn Dixon is primed to take over the starting position, but there is question marks about him when the backup QB has double the rushing touchdowns. It doesn't really give me the most confidence. Justin Ross does return, and he will hold down the wide receiver room, and not something that Clemson has to worry about too often, putting plenty of receivers in the league so far. The Clemson defense is no joke. Everyone knows that. Always good and full of kids that are tenacious and end up in the league. Their front seven is no joke. The havoc rate 16.6%, which is when the defense gets a turnover, tackle for loss. You guys know how it goes by now. Their defense allowed a 33% success rate, meaning they didn't allow a score on the play or a big time game of 50 yards or more on the yards to gain. And the crazy part is almost no one is leaving on the defense, which is a scary sight for a lot of teams and ultimately ends up meaning that they will probably end up finishing where they were last year. Their defense is super young as well on the depth side, transferring out. Only Niles Pinckney and Jordan Williams, losing pretty much 3 starters. But they have a sneaky tough 3-week to start the season. They come out the gate against the Georgia Bulldogs, get a cupcake game versus SC Upstate, and travel to NC State, who are a tremendous home team and usually good for one upset at home to year. But this is the year that I think they lose to Georgia to start the year for a reason I mentioned earlier. Georgia had the best rushing defense, allowing only 8 rushing touchdowns and lowest yards per rush in the country to go with the least amount of rushing yards allowed. I then think they run the table the rest of the year in the easy ACC schedule with their only tough game, in my mind, against NC State on the road. There's decent value in that over 11.5 wins, which is where I would stop. I just can't trust them to go undefeated this season because, God forbid, they get upset by NC State or whomever, and then your ticket is worthless. But I do think they end up making it to the college football playoff because they will have to play in that ACC Conference Championship game. And a lot of people will see the same story. Clemson ends up in the college football playoff. So as I sit right now, Clemson is 4-1 to win the national championship. And that's how a lot of you kind of feel the rest of the way. It's too early to judge for me. I kind of got to see how they do the rest of the year. But We will recap all the picks I have here on the show. We're going with Georgia Tech over 5 minus 110 on the Barstool Sportsbook. I think they end up 7-5, but 6-6 cashes the ticket just the same. We're then going with the NC State Wolfpack, who had a great year last year, but I think they finished 8-4, and we're going with the over 6.5 wins at plus 110 for NC State. Syracuse, I think they're the worst team in the ACC and will win one, maybe two games. So give me the under 3 at plus 105 over at William Hill because they weren't listed on Barstool Sportsbook, so I couldn't find their odds there. So I had to go over to William Hill. The under 3 wins is great because Syracuse is a trash can. Then we're going with the Seminoles and Florida State over 5.5 minus 125. I think they end up at the lowest, going 6-6, 500 on the year. But I think Mackenzie Milton and that offense will get them to where they need to be, going 7-5. Boston College and the Golden Eagles. Give me the under 7 wins at plus 110. I think they go sub 500 this year. So I love that number at under 7. Not sure why they're valued so high. Then we're going with the Miami Hurricanes. Their win total this year is 9.5, and it is juiced up to the under. Right now it sits at minus 148 for the under. I think they go 10-2. At the 9-3 is going to be tough, but I think they end up going 10-2. And they are plus 135 to win the ACC Coastal as well, which I'm going to sprinkle that. I'm giving out that, so we're going to do a half unit on that. For the plus 135 to win the ACC Coastal, I just think they're going to have a bounce back year and kind of return to the glory-ish days of what they were. So give me the over 9.5 plus 115 and a half unit sprinkle on plus 135 to win the Coastal Division out in the ACC. Notre Dame, I think they have a down year from where they've been in the past. I think they go 8-4, 7-5. So I love the under 9 at minus 132. That is a great number and great value when I think they're going to be way under that. North Carolina Tar Heels, after having a great year last year and all the praise they've been getting as of late, give me the under 10 wins, minus 139. I think they lose to Florida State, Notre Dame, and North Carolina State to go under that 10-win total. Wake Forest this season, I think they have a above 500 season after not finishing above 500 last year, going 7-5, and the over 6.5 wins is set at minus 134. That is an official play as well. And lastly, perhaps my favorite, even though it is quite the juice bag, Louisville Cardinals under 6.5 minus 139 over at William Hill. I just like this play. I just don't think Malik Cunningham is a winning quarterback. I think they recruited him thinking he was going to be the next Lamar Jackson, and he's a decent quarterback, no doubt about it. He's just not Lamar Jackson. And Scott Satterfield, that cloud is going to be hanging around him because when you preach the family, the team, and then you go and try to look for a new team, I don't know about you guys, but I wouldn't respond so well to that as well, especially when these kids are young, 18 to 22-year-olds that already sometimes have a problem with authority because, I mean, that's how everyone was at that age. So give me the under 6.5 wins at minus 139. And yeah, some of these teams I just can't get a gauge on, like Clemson. I think they lose early, but if they don't, then I don't see them losing the rest of the way. So that's just too risky for me as well. And as I mentioned, sorry to Pittsburgh and Virginia Tech. I just can't get a gauge on you guys, and I don't want to waste everyone's time with that. So those are the plays. Thank you all for listening. I know it was a long one, but put a little bit of work in this and crunch the numbers as well. So thank you all for listening. Make sure to follow along daily because there is a daily podcast here on the Free Money Podcast. So see y'all next time.